Once an awakening begins, you quickly realize that the real work isn't just in the light, it's in the roots. In this video, we're going to be exploring the contracts, ancestry, and past layers that shape your path and why clearing them is essential for true transformation. This video is the second of a three-part series on spiritual awakening, focused on clearing the roots, a robust process of clearing and healing. I highly recommend checking out the first video in the series where I offered a high-level perspective on what exactly is a spiritual awakening. It provides very robust context for this video here. It is linked in the description. So with a brief recap on what was covered in that video, we talked about the spiritual awakening process, that it is essentially an expansion of consciousness, awakening to spirit. But with spiritual awakening, it doesn't just involve opening you up and expanding your consciousness. It also reveals what's been buried underneath. Essentially, the light that is coming into our world stirs the sediment underneath. It brings the roots to the surface. So that is what this video is going to be focusing on. We are now going to go into those deeper layers, into this robust process of clearing these roots to bring about a blossoming of your true self. So, to start with, a good question to ask is, why is there anything to clear at all? Why do we have to heal anything at all in this lifetime? And for some of you who may have already been on this path for a while, you realize that there's quite a lot to heal and clear. So you might be wondering, why is there so much that needs to be healed and cleared? I will offer a macro perspective to start to put all of this in perspective. At a high level, this has to do with the transition that our entire world is moving through right now. We are in the process of moving to a higher plane of consciousness, where essentially we are in the process of moving into a new cycle of consciousness, where everything from the old cycle is coming up for review. Essentially, this is one ginormous karmic cycle completion, to where nothing from the old cycle can come with us into the new cycle. The new cycle is at a different plane of consciousness. Anything that is not in alignment with that consciousness needs to be brought up, cleared, and transmuted. So essentially, things are unresolved for nearly all of us that need to be resolved, cleared, healed, transmuted for us to move into this next phase of our soul's evolution and into the evolution of humanity at large. So essentially, you can think about it like this. Our human vessels, our human selves are like a really old computer, and we're in the process of wanting to install a brand new operating system. The problem is this new operating system is too advanced for our current systems. We have a very old hard drive, we have old wiring. The processing unit literally can't even run this new operating system. Essentially, we're running a very old system that's full to the brim. There's no hard drive space to even install this new operating system. So essentially what needs to happen is we need to clear everything out from this old system, start deleting old apps, deleting files. Better yet, remove the hard drive entirely and install a new one with bigger capacity. We want to remove the old RAM that makes things move really slow and install more expansive RAM memory so things move faster. We want to remove the old hardware chip and install a new processing chip that's lightning fast. We want to remove the old graphics card that only would display things in black and white, and we want to install a brand new graphics card that can display things in vivid color, high definition. Then once we clear everything out, install all this new hardware, now we can then install this brand new high frequency operating system. That is essentially the process that we are in right now. So the question is, and what we're going to be focusing on in this video is, what's in our old hardware here? What is in this old computer system that we've been running on? So most of what people are struggling with did not start with them in this lifetime. And as you go through this awakening process, you begin to expand and become more sensitive to feel these deeper causes, to feel these deeper layers. You start wondering, wait a minute, this isn't just me, this isn't just from this lifetime. you start to realize, or you maybe start wondering, that certain patterns that you're experiencing aren't just from recent experiences. For example, what might look like a personal anxiety pattern, or you might realize you've had a pattern of an inability to earn money, or maybe you've had a repeating relationship pattern in all of your intimate relationships that isn't serving you. You then start to trace this back. And this is what often is the case. It can be traced back to things like ancestral wounds, past life echoes, collective imprints. It's not even things that you might even be directly related to, but our souls and our human selves are connected to a collective field, collective consciousnesses. Um, then there are also things like soul fragmentation. You could be experiencing parts of self that have splintered off that then play out in your waking life in this life. We also have things like soul contracts that dictate a lot of the things that play out in our lifetimes. And then lastly, yes, there is also things that have occurred in this present life, especially during times of early childhood, things like your internal parts that form around these old conditions as protective mechanisms. So there's a lot that can go into what's making us operate in this reality and at this juncture where we are right now in this lifetime, in this epoch that we're moving through, where there's a lot to address. So I've noticed this for myself. For example, I've noticed sometimes when my external environment would trigger something within me, I would have almost like an internal panic response. My body would start increasing in heart rate, start sweating even a little bit, basically getting really nervous. But after a while, as I've moved through this path, I've realized that those responses that my body was giving off didn't originate from my own thoughts. I didn't feel like I was creating it. It felt like my body was acting on its own based off of the surrounding circumstances. That's when I realized, oh, this is something deeper. That's when things clicked for me. Essentially, once I made that connection, I now then would start going directly to the roots of the issue of what whenever a pattern would reveal itself, I would then think, what's the root cause of this? Because the response that my body would be giving wasn't in proportion to what I was actually experiencing. So I will share how to recognize that later in this video. So with all of this being said, I want to reassure you that you are not failing at healing. If you feel like you have a lot to clear, you feel like you've been at this for a while, you're not wrong. You're not behind. You are not late. You are right on time. This is just this is what is normal and appropriate for where we are in the collective cycle of humanity. So now that we understand that there's a lot to heal, there's a lot to clear, we're going to be moving through a lot in this lifetime, I would like to explain how this healing process tends to play out. There's a pretty common trajectory that most of us are moving through. First thing at a high level to understand is that healing is not a straight line. It is not linear. Healing is a spiral. You go through a looping spiral. And it is a very intelligent process. As I'll start to lay out how this spiral plays out, you'll start to realize that it's actually serving you to go in this kind of looping spiral. So, to start with, I would like to now share the most common layers of what people typically pass through on this healing spiral. The first layer that is most common for people to start with when they start thinking of wanting to improve themselves, expand their consciousness, improve their life circumstances, it almost always starts in the emotional and psychological layers. This is where most people begin. And sometimes there could even be almost like a pre-layer before that, where it could just start with like general personal development dynamics of someone might realize, I want more for my life, I want more success, I want to achieve more, or they might notice a pattern of I'm not achieving the results that I want. So they might start seeking things out like personal development, things that might fall into the category of self-help. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but that tends to be also a potential starting point. Simple patterns like strategies, tactics, All of that is great and very supportive. So that can also be a kind of a pre-layer that people start in. But once you really get into the layer of wanting to heal yourself and start getting to some roots here, then you start identifying deeper patterns. Oh, the reason I'm not achieving the results that I want, I'm not having success, there's a pattern here. And I want to get to the root of it. What is this pattern that is preventing me from landing my desired partner or coming into the amount of wealth that I want for myself? You start asking, what could there be a pattern here? And then when you start thinking maybe there's a pattern, oftentimes people start to seek out support for those patterns, for identifying and healing those patterns, such as therapeutic modalities, maybe traditional talk therapy, psychotherapy, emotional based therapies tend to become pretty common in this phase. Also, what could be considered early shadow work, or more appropriately coined, parts work, starting to understand that you have different parts of your psyche that come online at different with different experiences that play out in your life, and trying to understand, well, why is this part coming online? Why is this other part of mine in my psyche feeling scared or needing to protect another part? Also, a very common dynamic that tends to come during this beginning layer is seeking a connection with one's inner child. That is related to parts work, as an inner child is a type of a part. So that is also a type of dynamic that tends to come into play, wanting to get in touch with one's innocence, their inner emotional landscapes, as it is quite common for people to be emotionally repressed, to shove emotions down that they don't think are okay. So a great way of accessing a lot of these emotions are going straight to connecting with inner child parts, or even just trying to recall what it was like to be a child, to be in a more emotionally free state. So I can share, I have experienced all of these myself on my own journey through expansion and awakening. For example, I started exactly in that pre-layer that I mentioned myself, doing a lot of personal development work, devouring anything that might try to help my life on the surface. And then I started going a little bit layers deeper than that. I attended quite a few Tony Robbins events. I even began engaging in quite a few therapeutic modalities. In particular, I was really drawn to internal family systems therapy, the modality that involves understanding and mapping out the various parts of our psyche. And for me, I was hoping to access my deeper emotional parts. I was very emotionally repressed. So I was looking to figure out, why are there these parts that aren't allowing me to feel the deeper emotions? I then moved beyond that into what is called Jungian analysis, a frame of psychotherapy or psychoanalysis popularized by the psychoanalyst Carl Jung, that involved a lot of analysis of the symbolic aspects of my life, and also a lot of focus on dream interpretation. I had phases of my life where I was getting a lot of clear messages in my dreams, and they were even nudging me and pointing me clearly, hey, investigate this. You're blocked here. Here's how you can access your emotions a little bit deeper, coming through in the symbolic transmissions through my dreams. So all of these things were my attempt at getting more in touch with my own emotions. That is layer one. Layer two, here's where things start to deepen, especially if you start moving down more robust spiritual awakening paths. Things start to emerge. And again, you start to realize this isn't just about me. Here is where things related to our ancestry and our familial dynamics come into play. This is the second layer. We are connected to our lineages, both maternal and paternal, from our mother and our father. Each of them carry their own storied histories. Our DNA carries their traumas and their imprints, and their gifts as well, not just the negative things. But all of this is passed down to us through our DNA. So if you come from lineages that experienced a lot of persecution or strife, scarcity, so on and so forth, these are the types of things that were passed down through the lineage. Even if you just account for the state and well-being of your parents when you were conceived, perhaps your mother was really stressed, or your father was working a lot and wasn't really present, there was a lot of tension in the household, that is imprinted on you as you were conceived. So it shouldn't be surprising if the state of your conception was there was a lot of turmoil and strife, that your life circumstances will model that because it was directly imprinted on how you came into this world. So now, what are the types of things that are created as a result of these ancestral and familial dynamics? These are things like inherited emotional burdens. You may think it is my responsibility to carry the emotional weight for others, whether that is spoken aloud through a familial dynamic or unspoken. These are the types of things when it's ancestral related, things don't necessarily need to be spoken out loud and dictated to you by your caregivers or your family or the people in your family. They're just inherited. You don't even think about them, they just come online naturally. Also, patterns that feel too big or too old for you. In a way, a good metaphor for this could be that you have this feeling that you're cursed or you have bad luck. That's when you start, that is a sign, like if you're having those types of thoughts, like, oh, my family always has had this pattern of never being able to amass any money, or in my family, there's so much poor relationships, poor relational dynamics, intimacy just doesn't work well in our family. That's when you start to realize this is a deeper familial ancestral pattern. Also, things like loyalty bonds, enmeshments, where you're not really sure where you end and another family member begins. Again, that's where you start realizing like you're someone else's caregiver, where boundaries get violated or obscured. You're not really sure, like, are their emotions my responsibility? Am I supposed to emotionally caretake for other people in my family? Also, things like unprocessed grief or suffering in silence. Sometimes nothing needs to ever be spoken, but your familial line, your ancestry perhaps could have carried burdens in silence for generations, and that carries an emotional toll and an energetic toll on you in this lifetime. Also, you have things like nervous system patterns that can be shaped by your lineage templates. Again, if your people in your lineage were known to experience turmoil, war, upheaval, frequent scarcity. There was never enough, not enough food, not enough money, not enough shelter, not enough security. By default, that can create a template in your body of how to respond to life. You may naturally fall into panic states or a fight or freeze type of dynamic when certain things enter your life, because it is just so ingrained into the nervous systems of your ancestors that naturally that was passed down through your DNA. Therefore, this can create dynamics where it's almost as if your body is behaving on its own. Again, removed almost from your own thought process, removed from the external circumstances of what might even be appropriate. There's just something potentially that is so ingrained that has been passed down and inherited that it appears like the body, if you have some mindfulness, it appears that it can be acting almost on its own. So, this is where if you have these kind of disproportionate emotional reactions, that's a sign that there's something deeper going on and it could be related to an inherited pattern. The next layer, beyond the ancestry and your familial patterns, now you really start opening up here, because the third layer here is where we really start getting closer to the roots here, specifically things like soul contracts and karmic echoes. So, briefly at a high level, soul contracts are essentially just agreements that your soul makes to experience, to resolve, or to complete something. You might make an agreement with another soul. Hey, in this lifetime, I would like to experience this with you. You might make an experience, a soul contract just for yourself. I want to experience this type of turmoil because it might allow me to grow and expand through challenge. These things are very potent in how much they dictate for your life. And then again, karma as well. There tends to be this assumption that karma automatically means punishment or something negative. I like to just associate it with something that's just unresolved at the soul level. Typically, our souls like to experience they like to have a they like to have their loops closed. So you may have experienced something generally in one life experience, you were going to want to complete that, maybe the opposite, the inverse in another life. So it's just something that could be unresolved. These shape the architecture of your life tremendously. And they generally will only reveal themselves when you're ready. Because again, this is getting to the roots. Not everyone is ready to go straight to the root right from the start, right from the start. And the great thing about them, though, is that you have free will. You are a sovereign being, which means these soul contracts and karmic cycles can be completed. They can be amended or retired completely. You can graduate from these. You are not destined to fulfill these cycles endlessly for eternity. When you are ready, they can be completed. And this is also where the deepest relief often arises. You know, if you've completed a cycle that has lasted for eons of time, you will know in every part of your system that you are done with something because you've gotten to the root. So, a soul contract is essentially the original script for the role you chose to play in a lifetime. And at a certain point in your awakening, you are allowed to revise that script. And as I mentioned, this is almost always the actual root of the issue. Now, getting into the layers beyond this in terms of how to actually clear these things, here's where we start getting into the more energetic layers. How can we actually address these dynamics to allow them to heal and clear from our fields so we can move forward unencumbered by these past dynamics? This is where things like energy healing come into play, various attunements to your energy field. Work on a multi-dimensional level. We have parts of our consciousness that exist in other dimensions. Our souls live in other dimensions. Some of these dynamics are tethered or experienced or housed in another dimension. And it is possible, because we are multidimensional beings, to address them at their source in these other dimensions. We are also able to clear timelines. We are at any given moment attached or connected to an infinite number of timelines, and some of them we actually devote a fair amount of energy to beyond even our waking consciousness. We have the capacity to call back some of the energy from these timelines of maybe a parallel self that may be experiencing something else that is no longer serving us. We can call that energy back or close those timelines out. Close, especially in a simple manner. You can think of it as sometimes they can exist even in your mind. What if I did this? Or what if I go in this direction? What if I move here versus there? When you consciously contain both of those potentials in your mind, those are two very robust, coherent timelines. And they pull on your energy. You can consciously close out some of those timelines that are not meant for you any further and call that energy back to become more whole and robust. You can also release various imprints from the body through various types of healing modalities. Even things like holotropic breathwork can get a lot of this stuff by getting you into a pretty peak state. Things naturally start to release. But when something is very deep, such as when we're talking about things at the soul level, things in other dimensions, the deeper the root, the subtler the tool that is required to address these deeper roots. Essentially, you're not going to just like take a hammer or a chainsaw to get to something that's really deep. It requires finesse. It requires energetic precision when you're getting to these really deeper roots. These are the types of things that I just mentioned here. And then lastly, the last layer, and I'll also iterate that some of this stuff, as I mentioned earlier, is nonlinear. You can be going in and out, up and down through various layers. You're not just necessarily going through a step ladder system of linear progress, but a very important part of the healing process is your parts and your energy returning home. This is a bridge between this clearing and coming online more of your true self, more of your true nature, more of your perhaps higher faculties can now come online because more of you is present. So this could be dynamics such as soul fragments reintegrating, literal shadow aspects of you that have splintered off, can come home and bring with them their gifts, their energies, other things to support you on your path. Also, aspects of self or parts of you that splintered, that may have frozen in trauma, whether in other lifetimes or in this lifetime. Oftentimes, we create split parts to cope because the original self was too wounded to be able to face it head on. You can call these parts of you back to become whole and integrated. Also, your identity begins to soften because you have your wholeness coming online. You just become softer, more easeful, more integrated. So now, these are all the layers of the healing and clearing process. How to know when something isn't yours, which I had already alluded to briefly. So, as I mentioned, there have been many times where I've experienced my body was going haywire. It literally thought it was being chased by a beasted animal, or if I thought I was going to die. Literally, that is what my body was telling me. But my mind was generally pretty stable or close to being calm. Maybe some mild anxiety, but nowhere near in proportion to the way my body was responding. So that's when I can catch myself and realize there's something deeper at play. This isn't mine. This is when I realized that anytime that dynamic arose, it was always traced back to something older, either through my ancestry, another experience I have in another lifetime, something at the soul level, so on and so forth. So, for your own benefit, if you are ever experiencing emotional charge that is disproportionate to your current situation, if you have the capacity to zoom out a little bit and be a little mindful and ask yourself, is the way my body is responding appropriate to this situation? And if you get the answer no, chances are it is not yours. So, another data point, if your body responds, increased heart rate, sweating, confusion, but your mind feels calm, again, probably not yours. If you have recurring patterns, but you can't seem to identify the origin, like you keep running into the same issue over and over again, you keep having the same relationship patterns over and over again, but no one in your immediate sphere of influence has the same pattern, again, that's where you want to start asking. This is very likely going to be coming from a deeper layer. If you have sudden grief, fear, or resistance that feels ancient or existential, these are clear signs that if you're having experiences that almost like come out of nowhere and they almost take you over, you get overwhelmed by something that almost makes no sense to you, again, a clear sign that there is a deeper layer at play. And also, this can also happen, but is also a sign that there are deeper layers at play. If your symptoms intensify after awakening or after you become aware of it, again, that would seem to make no sense in the linear process of thinking, because typically once you become aware of something, you naturally start addressing it. But if it seems to get worse or more intense, that's typically part of this spiral process. You're getting closer to the root, and it's basically calling you forward to have more awareness be put in that direction. And that is how you know that it is very likely tied to something deeper. So now I'll dive a little bit deeper here on this concept of this healing spiral, and perhaps it'll make a little bit more sense now that I've shared all of these layers. You clear in spirals. And I will give the metaphor of if your consciousness is a pitcher of water that is filled to the brim, but there's dirt at the bottom, a bunch of dirt and sediment. The first thing that happens when you pour in new clean water is all of that dirt at the bottom starts being shot up to the surface to be faced and cleared. So essentially, light comes in, more awareness, more consciousness comes in, this old material rises, you clear it, you then expand, stabilize, and then the next layer reveals itself. And this happens not because you're broken, it happens because you're ready for those deeper layers. You would not have been able to manage the fullness of this full issue if you're at layer one, when you're just starting out on personal development, or you're just thinking about things from the mental layer, you're just starting out therapeutic practices, or you're just starting to get into your emotional depth, you were not yet ready to handle the full scope of an issue that was very likely traced back to experiences through your ancestry or literally in other dimensions. It would have been too much to take on all at once. So hence why, especially for those who have been on this path for a while, it feels like you might be looping on an endless spiral. It is a spiral, but it is an intelligent spiral, because each time you clear something, you then gain more awareness, more fortitude to be able to manage the next layer. So, this shows that this spiritual journey in this spiral dynamic is completely normal. It is cyclical, and it is for your highest good. So, on top of that, your ancestors will thank you for doing what they could not. So, if you happen to find yourself in this spiral dynamic, you feel like you've been healing and clearing for years and years and there's no end in sight, trust the process. It does get better, and eventually you will get to the root. Now, what sort of things can you do to start getting to the root? I will share some things now of what sort of modalities can help you address these deeper layers that are going to require some of that subtlety and energetic precision that I mentioned previously. And it is completely normal to need to seek support for these types of dynamics. Not all of us are trained or have the capacities to know specifically how to get to these deep rooted layers. They are oftentimes very complex. Many souls are trained through lifetimes of experience for specifically how to support others in these dynamics. So it is totally okay if you need support from someone else. I myself have sought out support from many others for support in these areas. But here are just a few things that I will share with you. If you're curious, you can search for yourself and see if anything resonates here. There is what is called QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis technique. That is a form of hypnosis where you are brought into a deep layer of hypnosis and have the capacity to have your consciousness move to perhaps have some of these deeper roots revealed to you if it is appropriate. Also, this is pretty closely tied to what is called regression hypnosis. And there are quite a few modalities that involve what would be considered regression, or basically moving your consciousness into a certain state to allow deeper layers to just naturally arise. There are various forms of what could be called energy healing. There's Reiki, there's all sorts of types of energetic healing, shamanic practices, pranic healing, you name it. Almost any type of indigenous or spiritual culture has its own force, its own form of what could be considered energy healing. And all of these do offer its own way of support. There are direct ancestral clearing practices. There are people who have specialties in such things. There are practices specifically to clear things from your ancestry. A simple search online could reveal some of those to you. There are also various body-based modalities. People who have skills with their hands know how to guide energy from within your energy field to identify things that are no longer meant to be in your field, to clear them from your field. And here's where I'll speak on a couple things that I am trained in myself. I have the capacity to bring through channeled guidance. If on top of just doing the direct energy clearing, it is also supportive to receive guidance from a higher perspective, from divine sources. I have that capacity to be able to deliver channeled guidance, and even that can be supportive in helping you direct where to direct your healing and clearing efforts. I also provide one-on-one ceremonial containers with my main focus of guided energetic meditations, where I can essentially lead what might be called quantum healing or energy healing, to where, again, focusing either directly on certain soul contracts or ancestral patterns that need healing or clearing. Those can be brought up for release through ceremonial containers, as well as deep remembrance, remembering who you were, remembering prior life experiences, or even just through somatic remembering, having things come back online to help you stabilize as these things leave your field. And then, of course, practices and processes to call some of that energy back. So there's a point on this path where you no longer need someone to tell you who you are. You need someone who can walk into the deeper layers with you. And that is the work that I do. So, putting all of this together, clearing isn't punishment, it is preparation for your true self to come online. Everything you clear creates space for who you actually are. Awakening opens the door, and clearing makes the house livable. So, if you find yourself needing support in navigating your clearing and healing process, if you'd like to get to the root of your issues, if you'd like to close out karmic cycles and soul contracts that you know no longer serve you, I can provide support in these exact things in my one-on-one work. If you're in this phase, if the roots of your life are surfacing, you don't have to navigate these deeper layers alone. I'd be honored to support you. So I invite you to check out my website and my offerings to see if anything resonates for you. I would be deeply honored if I could walk with you and support you in any way possible. So my links are in the description for that if you wish to peruse my offerings. So that completes this video here, the second video in this series on spiritual awakening. In the next video, which is the last of this 3-part series on spiritual awakening, I will be discussing what naturally happens as you go through this process of healing and clearing. There is, in fact, a lot of exciting and amazing things that begin to occur once you make the space for it. In this next video, I'll be talking about awakening to your soul's gifts, deepening your connection with spirit and the divine, and aligning with your true purpose. So I hope to see you in the next video. I hope this video here was useful for you, and I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.